So today's session is a bit of a roundtable focusing on the day in the life of an RPM, a readiness program manager, en français, gestionnaire de la programme de préparation. Just a quick reminder that today's session is being recorded and will be posted on PAFSO's YouTube channel at a later date. Finally, we acknowledge that PAFSO is hosting this Tradecraft Week on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. PAFSO acknowledges them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Early for people in Ottawa, but done to accommodate our participants who are mostly overseas. So today we will have 3 people. Alors, ce serait Doug Danch, qui se trouve présentement à Beyrouth, Sonia Hukias, qui se trouve à Londres, and Diego Tremblay, who's in Manila. I see that Sonia has joined so far. I'm not sure when the other 2 are joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alison Poff. I was the RPM in Riyadh for 5 years. I've just returned to headquarters. So I will be on the call as well and can participate if needed, but I thought it would be interesting to hear from our colleagues who are currently overseas. So with that, I will turn this over to Sonia.
Good morning. I see that Diego has also joined us now. The question I have is if I'm assuming people would like the speaker to have their video on. Is that accurate, Allison?
It is really just preference.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have mine on because I am in the office. But if you are comfortable having your camera on, and also please feel free to use the language, the official language of your choice. And to those who are participating, please feel free to ask any questions also in the official language of your choice. Thank you.
So I guess Allison's asked me to sort of kick off this session. So for those of you, I recognize a few names, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sonia Hoikis. I am an RPM Readiness Program Manager here in London. Diego and Doug will also introduce themselves, and then we'll start getting into the nitty-gritty of what exactly an RPM does and what your average day looks like, because we all have very, very different roles despite the fact that we have the same title. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. One of the things we were asked to speak about was the experiences that we've had that sort of shifted us into the readiness role. So I joined the department in 2003, was fortunate enough to come in at the time through post-secondary recruitment. So took the language training for a year, then at the time, we did 8 months of full-time MCO training. So I joined as an MCO. I went out on a number of postings as MCO. So my first was as Deputy Management Consular Officer in Iraq and Jordan, followed by MCO in Tanzania, and then DMCO in Kabul, followed by MCO in Kabul. Each of those locations had different advantages and disadvantages. And I got to experience a variety of different things, which is actually what led me into the RPM role. So as a couple of sort of experiences, I guess, that I had was within 3 months of arriving in Jordan, there was a hotel bombing that I participated in the response to, followed by the hostage taking of the Christian Peacemaker team in 2005. That was in Iraq. So I spent the better part of 4 months in Iraq, my very first trip. Then we did the evacuation from Lebanon in 2006, which I think everybody would be well aware of. So I was in Cyprus and then on a cruise ship / ferry boat to Lebanon, to the south of Lebanon, to bring folks out. Then I went to Tanzania. Within a couple of weeks of my arrival, there was a plane crash on Kilimanjaro. So that was an interesting experience. And then of course, Afghanistan is really what was the linchpin to have me move over to security. So in 2011, I returned from Afghanistan and joined the security division, the mission security division. I was the regional security manager for Sub-Saharan Africa. And that has really been what was the solidification of my desire to be on the security role. And I've been on the security side ever since. Postings to Kenya as RPM, dealt with the Westgate terrorist act that saw us lose, unfortunately, one of our colleagues, and then back to headquarters for a bit in the I branch on technical security, and then out here to London to do the job. So I'll leave it there. I don't want to spend too much time on who the heck I am. So I'll turn it over to Diego to introduce himself.
Hi, good evening, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Sonia. So, sorry, I'm not in my office. I'm as a typical RPM on the service. I'm by the seaside in a tropical location. Sorry for everybody who's in Canada dealing with the cold. It's Friday night for me, so mon parcours a été de commencer comme Sonia en 2003, mais on ne s'est pas croisés parce que j'ai pas eu à faire de formation linguistique. Et donc, j'ai fait la formation sur le terrain dans le bureau consulaire. Ensuite, j'ai été déployé à Bangkok pendant 3 ans. À Bangkok, j'ai eu quelques expériences intéressantes. Entre autres, j'ai eu à gérer un tsunami en 2004, le 26 décembre 2004, le tsunami de l'océan Indien. Ensuite, il y a eu quelques coups d'État et d'autres crises pendant ce poste. Je couvrais en même temps le Myanmar et le Cambodge et le Laos. Ensuite, je suis parti au Mali, donc à Bamako. À une semaine de mon arrivée, j'ai eu un cas très médiatisé. Donc, si vous recherchez Bamako Australian Farmer, vous verrez comment on s'occupe des Australiens en détresse. Alors, je me suis occupé d'un Australien qui avait été kidnappé pour un scam 419. Donc, il était allé chercher sa copine au Mali. Sa copine et plusieurs tonnes d'or. Évidemment, il n'y avait ni copine ni or. Ensuite, j'ai été posté à New Delhi pendant 2 ans. Et puis, je couvrais le Népal et le Bhoutan. Très, très intéressant comme poste, mais assez tranquille malgré tout. Et ensuite, je suis rentré à la centrale pendant quelques années, mais j'ai quand même continué à faire la gestion d'urgence. J'étais au centre d'intervention EWRC, Emergency Warfare Response Center, centre, en tout cas, vous pourrez rechercher l'acronyme en français. Et on a géré beaucoup de crises, le marathon de Boston, à Yann, on a géré Westgate, ça n'arrêtait pas. On avait le mois chaque semaine. Et finalement, avant de repartir en poste, j'ai aussi fait un poste lié à la sécurité pour le bureau du G7. Donc, j'étais en charge de l'accréditation. Donc, c'était moi qui devais, avec mon équipe, me charger de tout ce qui était la sécurité du G7 en termes d'accès au G7. Et après ça, je suis quitté. J'ai fait un poste au bureau d'un ministre consulaire. Très intéressant comme poste aussi. Et je suis parti, j'ai fait un poste, et c'est là que j'ai vraiment commencé comme agent de gestionnaire de préparation. Je suis parti au Guatemala, un poste très important en termes de criminalité. Et après l'évacuation pour la COVID, j'ai fait un poste, présentement mon poste à Manille, où je suis gestionnaire de la préparation. Et on fait beaucoup de préparation parce que les Philippines sont un poste où on s'attend à avoir un désastre destructif cataclysmique dans les prochaines années. Donc, on se prépare sans cesse à ce que ça arrive. Et voilà, donc aujourd'hui, je prends un petit break et je viens de plonger toute la journée. Et je suis sur le bord de la mer, à Puerto Galera, ici à quelques centaines de kilomètres de mer. Alors, avec ceci, je vais laisser la parole à Doug.
I don't see that Doug has actually been able to join us. I don't know if that's a connection issue or an operational issue in Beirut. I know when we spoke to him yesterday, he was quite busy with the events that are taking place in Beirut. So while we wait for him to come on and introduce himself, maybe we can just sort of continue with our presentation. All right, I'll turn my video back on so you know who's talking. What our thought had been is, because all three of us have very different portfolios, even though we have the same title, we thought we would sort of separate the position into sort of three. One is sort of the corporate services side of the position and what that sort of looks like. The emergency management piece, or this very specific readiness piece, which Diego will speak to, and then the operations piece, which Doug will speak to if he's able to join us in a little bit, because his position in Beirut, for obvious reasons, is a lot of operations and response. So I'll start on the corporate policy side of the position. I'm in a brand new, newly created RPM position here in London. As I'm sure many of you could probably recognize, security here in London and readiness is not necessarily on the forefront of everybody's minds here at Mission. We're in Europe. And although there have been a number of incidents that have taken place here in the UK as well as across Europe, it's definitely more of a readiness / corporate position than it is anything else. So I would argue, though, that there isn't your normal day or a day in the life. Every day is quite different, especially with COVID. So I arrived here last year, right in the height of the global pandemic. So it's been quite an interesting adjustment to go from working from home and not knowing any of my team or anybody in a building of 300 plus people, to now we are back in the office full time, 5 days a week. So it's been a challenge on the COVID front. I'm probably one of the very few RPMs that is not heavily involved in the response to COVID, and that's predominantly because I arrived in the middle of it. So it didn't seem necessary to sort of jump in. I assist as much as I possibly can, but definitely not the lead here in the UK or at our High Commission. So what exactly does an RPM at a level A post do? At the end of the day, it's mostly about the changing of culture, influencing, and networking. So I'm here to try to get security and readiness on the forefront of everybody's minds, recognizing that it's Europe. I'm here to prepare the mission for when and if something is going to happen. I'm here to create policies and procedures that are based on the Government of Canada security requirements, as well as Global Affairs' mission requirements for security, or the MSI, the Manual of Security Instructions. So as I'm sure you can probably understand, I may not be the most well-liked person here, and that's where the networking and influencing comes in, especially with such an enormous mission. I'm also one of the few RPMs that actually reports to the MCO and does not report directly to either the deputy head of mission or the head of mission. And that's strictly based on the fact that the size here in London does not warrant having an FS3 officer report to an EX4, EX5 level, and therefore report to an EX2 MCO, which in some respects actually is quite beneficial because the MCO manages the vast majority of everything operations, and that's where a lot of the security and readiness elements sort of fit in. So that's sort of it in a nutshell for London. It's hard to sort of speak to what a day in the life is here because we've just come back to the office. So I'm not really sure, to be quite honest, what a typical day here looks like. But it is definitely not the operational positions that I'm used to having. It's a lot of policy, procedure, meetings, managing. It's a big team here. We're a team of 5. Lots of comms. So we do monthly bulletins, we do weekly cyber messages right now. We run an annual security open house or readiness open house where we bring in experts. We do a lot of training, we do a lot of presentations. a lot of briefings, those types of things here. I'm not running after security guards, deciding if we need to give them toilet paper or tea, which I've done in previous posts. So it's a bit of a slower pace, I would say, than my colleagues. I understand that Doug is on the line. So I don't know if Doug, you want to introduce yourself now, if you can turn things on.
I believe he's having trouble. He can hear us, but we can't hear his audio. So
okay. So then I'll turn it over to Diego then, if Diego wants to talk about the EM part of the RPM position.
Sure, thank you, Sonia. So, and I'm sorry for the dog in the background, but yeah, I'm in rural Philippines. The preparation part of this job is very interesting. We spend a lot of time getting ready in case something happens. I remember when I took the Guatemala posting first, I was extremely stressed because there are 6,000 murders in Guatemala every year. And I was really stressed that all my CBS wouldn't make it back home. And so when I got the post, I realized that the government is really, really doing everything that it can to protect the lives of everybody. So we had 4 armored vehicles. We wouldn't do any official movement without bodyguards. We had red zones where we were not allowed to go. Every movement in the embassy for CBS and LES had to be consulted with our section, and we had to say yay or nay, or we have to escalate it and go to the ambassador or even to the Department of Security officer, depending on what the movement was. So that was the preparation and the mitigation. So every time getting ready, if something would happen, criminality-wise, a big portfolio. But at the same time, Guatemala was, and when I'm talking about Guatemala, when I'm actually in the Philippines, is because it's very similar in terms of volcanoes. I think there were 27 active volcanoes in Guatemala. Earthquakes, volcanoes and earthquakes usually go together. And we got not typhoons, but hurricanes every year. And I moved to the other side of the planet, and it's exactly the same thing. We don't get criminality, but we get terrorism. We get extremism. In 2017, 2 Canadians got kidnapped and beheaded here in the south of the Philippines. Manila is sitting on a major fault. Doug was posted here, so he knows about this. He set up the program. Thank you very much, Doug. Now I just have to maintain it. But we're expecting a major cataclysmic earthquake imminently in the scale of the Earth, which means in the next 500 years. It's not that bad, but it could happen tomorrow. Alors, on se prépare pour ce tremblement de terre. On ne sait pas si les endroits où on habite sont prêts à recevoir un tremblement de terre de cette magnitude. Chaque année, on a des typhons. On a tout l'alphabet des typhons. On passe à travers l'alphabet et on recommence l'alphabet avec des lettres grecques. Donc, l'année passée, nous avons eu la tempête, la plus grande tempête jamais enregistrée sur la face de la planète et passée directement sur la ville de Manille. Alors, il faut être prêt à recevoir ce genre d'événement. Ensuite, nous avons un volcan à peu près à 60 km de la ville qui est en éruption, qui est très actif. Donc, à peu près tous les 6 mois, on doit faire attention. Est-ce que le volcan a recommencé à faire éruption? Est-ce que les gaz et la poussière viennent vers Manille? Maintenant, tout ça dans le contexte de Covid, c'est une variable additionnelle. Donc, une journée typique dans la vie du gestionnaire de la préparation à Manille, c'est maintenant qu'on est de plus en plus de retour au bureau, c'est d'assurer que le bureau est sécuritaire pour tous les employés, parce qu'à Manille, c'est notre section qui est en charge de la COVID.
I believe Doug is one of the phone callers. I'm going to ask them to unmute, and maybe we can get that working. Maybe Doug is one of them.
Well, I don't know if Doug, Doug, anytime you come back online, just cut me off. But I think the plan that we had is that Sonia was more corporate in an mission. I was more preparation in case something happens. And Doug is in the middle of it. So he's in a mission where there was a port that exploded a year ago, and there were major uprisings 7 days ago. So he is really the operations of it. He is really working in it. Thank you. I just had a cup of champagne served to me. It's very interesting. When I joined, when I landed in Bamako, and I was at the MCO consular, but there was a lot of security involved. The first thing that the first LES came into my office and said is that a Canadian was walking on the roofs of houses, and the roofs had collapsed, and he had fallen into a house, and people were holding him at gunpoint. The first thing that happened when I got in Mali is that we had that Australian kidnapped. And a couple of months later, we had 2 Canadian diplomats kidnapped by Al-Qaeda, Bob Fowler and Guy,
Louis Gay.
Louis Gay, not Guy. Louis Gay, of course. Sorry. Thank you very much.
No problem. It helps being old.
And yeah, but I had them for almost a year, and it's horrible that I forgot his name. I'm very sorry. And so this is actually what, when you're an MCO, and the thing is, both the three of us, Sonia and Doug and myself, are MCOs. And when you don't have an RPM, you have an MCO who does what we're doing. And so we've been dealing with crises even way before we're RPMs. There's a hand up.
So, Diego, I'm wondering, talking about Bob and Louis reminds me that I was in the Middle East Division on the political side at the time that all of that was going on. It wasn't my file. I had Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt and Jordan back then when all of those were fairly quiet countries. But could you talk a little bit about what was your interaction like with headquarters when that was going on? I mean, what like how did you connect with different parts of the department from the field when all that was going on? I know you know, there's probably some limits on what you want to say, given we're being recorded and so on, but could you just give us a general sense? And maybe also if there were things that were difficult from your point of view that didn't have to be, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, I'm trying to think of, for people watching this, how they might work better with someone in your role when they're at headquarters, perhaps on a political desk, and you guys are in the field dealing with something.
So when we were dealing with this crisis, it was a whole, I mean, the Globe and Mail said it was the biggest diplomatic operation ever. Whatever, you know, they had to sell papers, but it was amazing. We were in a micro mission. We had 8 CBS, and all of a sudden we were 3 times the size of it. We couldn't fit everybody in the embassy, so we rented the house next door. But because we couldn't show that we were bigger, we had to drill a hole in the wall so we could transit discreetly between houses. We had JTF2. We had people that don't exist in the government of Canada. That was really interesting. We had to set up, you know, kitchens and washing machines and stuff for these people. They were always ready to intervene. They had plans. They were training, you know. We had Mr. Bailey, who passed not too long ago, who was our second head of missions. So we had 2 heads of missions at the same time, one dealing with the crisis and one dealing with the embassy. And he was basically meeting the president of Mali every second day to see what was going on. And I mean, it was extremely interesting. I guess what, you know, with headquarters, you have to deal with the people who are actually doing the job, which is us and you guys. And you have to deal with the people, the political side of it, the minister's offices and all those people. I remember we had an amazing evacuation plan for when we would find them, dead or alive. Possibly it was alive, but we had all of the options, everything. It was an evacuation plan. It was about 100 pages. And then one day, private counsel said, no, we need a plan that is 4 pages long. And so I spent the night doing, you know, reducing my plan for 120 pages to 4 pages to satisfy someone in the government who was, I don't know, maybe lazy, or maybe there was a reason behind it, but, you know, well, very long hours.
Anybody watching this who's about to write the Foreign Service exam, that's why they have that piece on there about having to summarize a big article, right? Now we know.
Exactly. So it was interesting to see also how countries work together. They were not, I mean, they were diplomats, but they were seconded to the UN. So how did we work with the UN? And then in Mali, how did we work with the other countries and not the normal countries? So it was before Libya fell. So we had the Libyans and we had the Algerians and we had the French and we had, so it wasn't the typical Five Eyes. So it was extremely interesting to deal with these people. And I mean, I don't think it's a big secret, but everybody was listening on everything that we were doing. So what do you say and what do you don't say? And where do you leave your phones? And where do you have your conversations? And do you take a walk in the park or do you actually talk in the embassy? It's fascinating. And, you know, and this is very interesting because when we get our training on security, they say, yeah, be careful about information and stuff. And no one realizes how true this is. You know, whatever you say, someone will be listening to it, and powers that you don't even imagine are listening to it. When we evacuated Bob and Louis, we landed in a military base somewhere, and the owners of that military base, the first thing they said, you guys said this, we really don't like it, and we were taken aback because it was confidential. So they knew exactly what we were saying at all times. So anyway, really interesting.
Very yes. Hopefully these things do not happen that often, but yeah.
Well, I mean, Sonia was in Iraq, so I'm pretty sure Sonia has a couple of interesting, you know, helicopter rides and other things.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Diego. You gotta love Facebook when the Facebook ad comes up and says 14 years ago, when it shows you the picture where you were, and it's of me in a US helicopter flying over Iraq with the automatic weapon right beside me. And it's like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing 14 years ago. But similar to you, Diego, with the hostage crisis that took place in Iraq in 2005, it was a whole of government response. And at that time, we didn't even have an embassy. In Iraq, it was strictly an office. It was one room. We were co-located with the Brits. There was a chargé who at the time was Stuart Henderson, and the rest of the team all worked out of Amman. So similar to Diego's situation, where you had a contingent of 8 CBS that tripled, we were 1 CBS that became 15, all working in the same office. It was an interesting experience. It was a whole of government experience. It was definitively a life changer for me, living in Iraq for 4 months. It also completely turned me off the media and how absolutely incorrect the media reporting can be on any of the situations that any of us live overseas. And to this day, I'm not one to watch the news, which is the polar opposite, I think, of what we're all supposed to do as diplomats overseas and be a readiness program manager, political officer, trade, whatever you are. You're supposed to be like tuned in to the events of the world. And I still have a hard time. I think I still suffer PTSD with the media because I just can't seem to believe anything that I read these days. And that's 14 years, 15 years, 16 years later. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure. Does anybody else have any questions? Recognize that we're way ahead of schedule, but we were sort of hoping in our discussions about this presentation that it would be a dialogue. So Marty, you just asked a question in the chat. How do you deal with the stress of high pressure, life-threatening events? Oh God, that's a difficult question to answer. I think some of us deal with it the way that Diego's enjoying his evening right now, with a glass of wine after a hard day for sure. And I think that's pretty standard. I think for me personally, when I'm in an operational stressful environment like the Iraqs or the Afghanistans, you sort of have to compartmentalize and shut that part off and pretend like that part of your life doesn't really exist, and you sort of focus on the task at hand and the events at hand for sure. And if you're able to do that and you don't just sweep under the rug the rest of the stuff, then at a later date, when you're done the operations or when you leave on R&R, that's when you deal with the more difficult stuff. And I definitely think that many of us are similar to, you know, a frog in a boiling pot of water. If you throw somebody into the boiling pot of water, the frog jumps out instantaneously. It doesn't even touch the water and the frog comes. Whereas when you're actually in that location, the water starts to get warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And there's so many of us that are just not able to see that we're that frog in the pot of boiling water. And I can remember being in Nairobi, and Westgate happened, I want to say Westgate happened about 3 weeks after I got there. And Westgate was catastrophic. It was the first time in a very long time that we had lost a CBS. Her spouse was gravely injured. There are moments of that event that I will take with me to the grave that I will never, ever forget, including welcoming her parents and having a memorial service at the official residence. And both of her parents were diplomats, career diplomats, traveled the world. I can remember her father saying, you know, we lived through a coup d'etat in such and such a place. I want to say he said Cote d'Ivoire, and we survived everything. And then she goes to the mall and she gets killed by some beep. It was horrific. It was horrific. But after 14 months, I tapped out. And it's the first posting that I actually tapped out. I had worked the equivalent of about 3.5 years in 14 months I had no life, no social life. I did a lot of what Diego's doing at this exact moment in time. So thank you, Diego, for getting that timing perfect. It's like we had it planned. And I had to leave. I left before it got to the point of no return. So I hadn't hit the burnout stage like a lot of our colleagues get to when you're in the hot water like that. But I knew myself, and the time in Iraq and the time in Afghanistan really helped me to learn about myself and what my limits were. And I knew that if another Westgate were to happen, I would not be able to sustain it. And I was not willing to put other people's lives at risk. As the manager of the security program, I just couldn't have it so that I stayed. So I tapped out 14 months, and it was probably the best thing I ever did. So I know that's not really answering the question, Marty, of how you deal with it, because we all have our own ways of dealing with it: exercise, music, talking, writing, painting. You know, there's so many different things that you can do. But I think the key part to it all is getting to know yourself and knowing what your limits are and recognizing those limits and setting up those boundaries so that you don't boil away in a pot of hot water. Diego, do you want to try that? And then I see Pam, you have your hand up, but I don't know if it's related or if you want to wait until
it is
Diego
just
talks,
a follow-up. So maybe I'll let Diego go, and then maybe I'll follow up on that point with both of you.
Sure.
I guess we're not so. I hope this is not a recruiting talk, because we don't want to scare anyone away. This is a great, amazing job, but we after it's going to be 20 years soon, and like Sonia, I mean, she didn't use the word, but I think I'm scarred and scared. You know, I was in the rapid deployment teams, and I got deployed a couple of times. And when I was on that plane, I was like, what are you doing on this plane again? Going to this, whatever place in Earth where it's a disaster and you're expected to be a team lead and organize Canada's response. And it's so hard. And I don't know why we do it, but we keep on doing it. You know, I had crises from tsunami was my first crisis. I had been 6 months on the job, and after that, for many years and many talks for MCOs, I was asked, "Can you come and give us a talk about how it feels to deal with a crisis, and what do you feel as, you know, responder?" And I think even Sonia invited me once to do this at CFSI. And what comes, you know, when I don't prepare these things, I just stand there and I let the feeling come up, and it's the smell of death, the smell of rotten flesh, the smell of, you know, and the feelings and the shivers and the victims that come and say, "Have you found her?" or that hug you or whatever. And it's very difficult. But I mean, this is also why we're doing it, because it's concrete, it's immediate, it's whatever you do, you have an immediate impact on lives of people. And if they told me, "Can you get on a plane tomorrow?" I'll probably get on a plane tomorrow again. And I'll be again, what the F am I doing on this plane, going to this shithole again, trying to fix a situation that is none of my doing. Anyway, it's so how do you deal with life-threatening situations? I remember, so there was this tsunami in Thailand, was in Phuket for a while. And then a few months later, I was in Phuket again, but this time on holiday. And sorry for this, but I was in the restroom of the airport having a relaxed moment, and I get this notification of a 6.9 or something, like a big one. We still had an operation in Phuket for the identification of remains and things. You know, there were 5,000 people there in Phuket only. And I was there with my wife at the time. And we told the wives, I was there with Nick Fairlot and the FSI, and we told the wives, get on the plane, go back to Bangkok. And we got off the boarding area. We got on the street. We stopped a pickup truck, and we got on the back and we said, take us to a high area because we want to be here tomorrow when the second tsunami swipes the island. And we want to be all ready to intervene immediately. And today I'm like, Jesus, I should have been on that plane. But, you know, that's how you deal with situations. I guess we want to be heroes, and you shouldn't be heroes. No one should be a hero here. We're not paid enough to be heroes.
Wow. I don't think that most people who think of the Foreign Service think of this kind of work, right? And so this is my follow-up question for you guys is, how do you, like, did you guys get support from the department, from the employer in managing these situations? How do you feel about, you know, what supports are available? I mean, I did 2 tours in Afghanistan as well as a political advisor. And, you know, I went on, after the second one, I went on leave without pay for a year, which was fine. But I realize now I should probably have been on medical leave for a good 3 months of that, because all I did was sleep. I remember it was a full 3 months before I remember the day when I realized, like, hey, I've actually been awake and vertical longer than I was asleep today. This is like a big moment. So, you know, I was not dealing directly with the same kind of human situations as you guys were as in your job, but definitely, you know, we used to talk about not just PTSD, but like operational stress injury. And I would say for sure, I didn't have PTSD because, you know, I was not in combat or in any of those things, but I probably had really an operational stress injury when I look back. And last weekend, I went to a reunion with some of the people from my old headquarters, and listening to the military talk. I mean, everybody is still dealing with some of that years and years later. But at PAFSO, according to Global Affairs, we do not have a single instance of PTSD being reported in the department. And I find it hard to believe. I find it a little bit hard to believe. Nobody asked me. Nobody, you know, there was no follow-up medically except for what I undertook for myself. And I feel like this is a gap in what we have out there. So I wonder if you guys could speak to that. And then I saw Tam and Allison have hands raised, which is good too. So thanks.
So, Diego, do you want to take this one first? Or?
No, go ahead, Sonia. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm conscious of the fact that this is being recorded and likely going to go on a YouTube channel. So I'm going to try and be relatively diplomatic.
Just to let you know, we can, if you want, if there's anything anybody says that you'd rather not be on that channel, we do have limited editing power. We can blank out some of the sections. But
I'm not going to say anything that I haven't said to a gazillion other people before. I just might not curse and swear like I normally do with my friends. From my perspective, the department is seriously lacking in the support side of the shop. From all of my experiences, and there's been a number similar to Diego, where you're identifying dead bodies, where you have rockets landing within meters of you, where you're traveling to locations that nobody should ever have to travel to. You're seeing things that nobody should ever have to see. I don't recall ever once being asked if everything was okay. I don't recall once ever being, you know, like the military does these psychological assessments before they go out on assignment. That does not exist in our department. It doesn't even exist on the way back in. You have to see one of the EAP counselors, or at least you used to before going to places like Afghanistan. But from my perspective, and this is not knocking EAP counselors in any way, shape, or form, I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours talking to them, but it's more of a check in the box than anything else. I'm also probably not in the best space with the department at the minute, given their complete lack of support on other areas of our lives that I've never experienced until my existing posting. So no, I mean, to answer your question, Pam, I don't think the department knows how. And I think that the department is completely inaccurate in thinking that there aren't PTSD cases within our department, because I can count on one hand the number of people that I know that have had to go on leave without pay after the hardship assignments that, you know, they were clinically told they had PTSD following their assignment. So no.
That's interesting. No, and like, I mean, I really think it's commendable that you recognized for yourself that you needed to leave, you know, which is good. I mean, I often say to people, listen, like, this is a stupid metaphor, but, you know, if you see them coming toward you with the chainsaw, start screaming then. Don't wait until they've taken your leg and then, you know, say something about it, because, you know, we see sometimes these situations where people come to PAFSO after huge damage has already been done. And, you know, sometimes it's people who, like, they're maybe behaving or reacting in ways like related to previous stress, and then getting blamed. You know, it's like, oh, it's you, it's your performance, there's something wrong with you. And, you know, we can help people to a certain extent, but we can't go back in time and give you back what was taken from you. So my advice to people listening to this is to really, you know, look after yourself, because even with the best of intentions, our bosses, I think, don't know what we're all doing. I mean, I did a training session for a headquarters that was going in after mine. And there was somebody there from headquarters who had been my direct boss, or my direct contact. My direct boss was a military commander who saw me doing something in this exercise that, shall we say, would probably what counts as more, you know, something that would promote moral injury, you know, and said, oh, this is ridiculous. They can't be having you do this. This was not part of your job. And I just looked at them and I'm like, yeah, this definitely was part of my job in both assignments. And, you know, headquarters, I think, just does not have a clue sometimes about what's involved sometimes in the work that we do. So Sonia, just a quick follow-up, like, when you left Nairobi, did you get a hard time about leaving, or did you get support to leave? I'm just curious.
So both. I wouldn't say I got any support. I didn't get any pushback from headquarters. I did have to make a business case to headquarters to make sure that the FSD folks didn't charge me for my move back, and my letter had to go to a committee so that I was able to, like, really lay it all out on the line for people, which a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable given the hallway reputations that we all get or don't get within the department. And that's probably one of the reasons why there are no confirmed cases of PTSD in our department. Nobody wants to come forward. So I was able to depart not having to pay for my move, but I left Nairobi on a Friday and I was expected to start work on the Monday.
Oy.
So no. No.
Did you engage PAFSO on any of this? Because I'm just, for folks listening, that is the kind of stuff that we can help out with, varying levels of formality and informality. But if anybody's listening to this and facing something like that, give me a call.
Well, yeah, and I didn't engage PAFSO back then. If you were to ask me today, right, like, I think the mentality changes a little bit as well.
And you guys were PSAC at that time too,
that
right?
is an accurate statement.
Difference.
Yes, yeah. And there's no way that PSAC would have done anything for the 250 or 300 of us and the 20,000 people that they had. Well, but that's for another discussion, right?
It's harder for them, to be fair. Like, but for anybody listening to this in the future, I would say engage your union, whatever they are. And if it's someone who's in a foreign service related position but isn't PAFSO, often those other unions will reach out to PAFSO, and we will help the other group. So sorry, I don't want to take up, I see other hands and other comments, so I'm going to shut up now.
I guess my hand is next.
Yes.
Good morning. Mine's a little lighter. I won't ask about your trauma. I'll ask, in many cases, an RPM has several countries of accreditation. You know, in my case, my RPM is in Honduras, but he goes, I think, all the way down to Panama. So how do you find being able to handle all that? Or is it a case like me? I'm a trade commissioner who covers Honduras and Nicaragua from Costa Rica. And I basically don't, because you just can't do a lot of stuff from a distance. So do you find you just get caught up in the country you're in and the others become secondary? Or are you able to kind of spread yourself around? I don't know. How does that work for you guys?
I can take that one, Cam. I was in, when I was in Guatemala, I was covering, well, not covering, but assisting other countries. And our GSRP loved to go to San Pedro Sula, which is like murder capital of the world. So it was very interesting because, you know, either she would fly in or she would drive to the border and then exchange and go to a different armored vehicle, and our bodyguards could not go to the other side, or if they could not take their weapons. So either we had to, of course, never smuggle the weapons into the other country. And yeah, exactly. So interesting challenges, but it's usually, I think, the countries that we're given, the country where we are resident, is more than enough to keep us busy. So unfortunately, we don't have, I think it's, especially now where we can travel, but you know, I'm supposed to cover New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, and Brunei. I wouldn't have enough hours in a day to cover all of the countries and to travel to all of the countries. So we do the best we can. Usually we're posted in the worst country of them all, and we assist the best we can. But I mean, I don't know if I'll be ever able to go to New Zealand, Australia, or Brunei in my posting.
Just to say, I'm going to San Pedro Sula to do election observation at the end of November. I don't think it's quite as bad anymore. We no longer have armed guards when we go there, but we do generally have an armored vehicle. But so maybe it's not, maybe it's gotten just a tiny bit better since your day. Thank you.
Allison, you have your hand up. Did you want to chat?
I do. I also want to give you guys, it's 9:25 Ottawa time. So we have officially 5 minutes left, but if people want to stay a little bit longer, that's also fine. And again, I can also echo a bit what Diego was saying. When I was the RPM in Riyadh, I covered the entire Gulf. I was fortunate enough because the flights were really close. I was able to go to every country I covered at least once a year, but it's exhausting. And it's, again, as Diego says, you're posted to the worst of your area, or not necessarily the worst in terms of security needs. It could be the one that needs the most assistance. It could be the one that we have the largest mission and that's where they need you to be. So definitely you're playing a very supportive role to the other missions, but it also means in an emergency, you're able to step in and help them out. On a separate note, I'm wondering, maybe we could wind up the call a bit if you guys want to talk a little bit about the training the RPMs are given. So not that they just put us on a plane and shove us out into the middle of nowhere and hope we do our best. So maybe you could speak a little bit about the training the RPMs go through, because I think it's more intense than a lot of the other streams get before they go on posting.
Do you want me to take this one, Diego? At least I'll start, and then you can continue. So on the training piece, I think it's sort of evolved over the years. I was involved in the very first RPM training back in the day, 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. And it's dramatically different now than it was back then. It's about 8 to 10 weeks of training now, full time, before you go out on an assignment as an RPM. And as a brand new RPM or not, you still have to take the training. Although if you've been an RPM before, it's just little bits and pieces of the training that you have to take as opposed to the whole program. The whole program includes, or it has included in the past, things such as the HET, the hostile environment, or the hazardous, I think is what they call it now, the hazardous environment training, because that's also been changed a gazillion times since I took it the first. Lots of in-class stuff, or pre-COVID was in class, now it's all online. There's online training course that you have to take as well prior to those 8 weeks in class / online. Anything from physical security, property, there's IT security stuff, there's a little bit of cyber security, there's, exercises on the manual of security instructions. I don't know if they're still doing it, but the couple of times that I've done the training, there was defensive driver training where they'd send you off to learn how to drive just a normal vehicle, not an armored vehicle, but in a more defensive way. So they definitely don't pick you up and drop you in a mission and say, have at or have fun. And then there's a mentorship program afterwards. So if you're a brand new RPM, they'll connect you with an oldie or an oldie with a newie. And there used to be money involved so that you could go, your mentor and mentee could switch and swap places in order to provide support. Again, COVID has changed that, I think, a little bit, if not substantially. But there's definitely a significant training program involved in the RPM, which is why it's not just MCOs in the RPM program anymore. There's political officers, there's trade officers, there's one-time assignments from all kinds of different divisions within the department. So I guess I'll sort of end this little spiel with, although they're MCO assignments per se, they definitely don't only require MCO competencies. In fact, there's a huge amount of competencies from a political or trade officer that's required in the security side, particularly networking, influencing, reporting, writing, et cetera, et cetera. Diego, did I miss anything?
I guess no. I think you covered pretty much everything, Sonia. But I think if you want to be a well-rounded master of disaster, you can join the standing rapid deployment teams. They have a simulation, a 5-day course, which I don't want to say too much because if you're doing it, you don't want to know how it goes. But this simulation is worse than most of the crises you will ever be involved in. It's a 5-day thing. And then in the middle of the night, on one of the days, you're told there's a crisis and you have to deploy. And it's amazing. And people crack and people cry and people, it's the best crisis that you will ever leave. So that's very, very good. And then there was something else. So the HET is a good one. I did the armored vehicle training and in Guatemala, because it was a criminality environment and my bodyguards had not used their guns in 10 years. I took them to the field. Of course, I wasn't a trainer, but I took advantage of the training and learned how to fire a gun. The thought behind this is that if your bodyguard is down and there's a gun lying in the ground, might as well take the gun and defend yourself. So yeah, I don't like guns, but it was pretty cool. So yeah, we have a lot of training.
I will jump in. It's Allison. So obviously some of the training was modified as a result of COVID and along with the kind of the mentorship program, but they are looking at moving back to in-person again. obviously modifying stuff a little bit due to the pandemic. But other than that, that's kind of the main training outline. For anybody on the line who has any questions or is interested in learning more about the RPM work, I would encourage you to reach out to our presenters or to reach out to myself, or even if you're in a mission with an RPM, to speak with them. And then I will just do a final tour de table to see if anybody has anything to add before we wind this session up.
Allison, could I just ask one quick question to help us with our pub quiz?
Sure.
And to end on a light note is, can you guys tell us what was the weirdest or funniest thing that's ever happened to you as in your role as an RPM?
Sonia, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I guess I love being put on the spot with something like that.
Sorry.
No, don't.
You can pass.
No. I'm just trying to, like, funny or weird. Like, there's a lot of things about the RPM position that aren't really funny nor weird. But I would say of my career, the funniest thing that I've ever been involved in was being the guest of honor at a dinner in Jordan. And I had the pleasure of trying to figure out how to say I was vegetarian when they offered me the eyeballs of the goat. And I was required to eat the eyeballs of the goat because you don't want to offend anybody. Yeah, it was fun.
One sentence that if you're ever in a like a Slavic language speaking country that they always understand, u меня jest alergia. I have an allergy, and that gets you out of a lot of those things.
I wish I knew.
Diego, how about you?
I think most of my experiences would not be acceptable here.
Okay.
We once had someone who wanted to visit the place where his brother had passed, and so we took him around, and then he said, "Yeah, I think my brother would have taken a swim in the ocean here." So we said, "Yeah, sure." So he went and we got to swim into the ocean, and he couldn't get back on the boat. So we had to tie a lasso around him and drag him all the way to the beach so he could get out of the ocean. So that was quite interesting.
Those are all good. It's like, yeah. I think most of us, certainly those of us in the political stream, do not have, I mean, we have the food experience, but we certainly don't have the other kind of thing as part of our regular job. So thank you both. And don't forget, we have our pub quiz at 5 p.m. tonight. So